I'm sitting here working on this Gibson, or I'm trying to work on it, and I can't even concentrate because I'm so excited. Um, there's Fordson manifold sitting up there I'm working on too. Um, as some of you may know, I am a huge Fordson fan, Fordson history nerd, Fordson collector. I just love Fordson stuff, Fordson history. It's fascinating, um, and I have found an awesome Fordson crawler conversion. I'm having it shipped from 13 hours away from here, and it's supposed to arrive here next half hour. Um, so I'll show you what I got because believe it or not, I already have one of them, and I was super excited about the one that I have, and I didn't make a video of it, so I'll kind of integrate these two, and I'll show it to you. So this is a Bell City track pull crawler conversion kit. These are super uncommon. Usually, if you see a crawler conversion on a Fordson, it's a Traxxon Type F is the most common. There are some Traxxon Type Ds out there, but these you don't see a lot of. They are out there, but you don't see a lot of them. These were originally manufactured by the Johnson Company. The manufacturing rights were later sold to Bell City, as I understand it. And the only thing that, you know, we as Fordson collectors can figure is that these had a much more complicated steering and clutch linkage setup on it. They had, they steer completely with the steering wheel, but they actually have clutches and brakes that disengage and actuate when you turn the steering wheel. It's a very clever, very slick system, but it's more complicated, so consequently one can only assume that these were substantially more costly than a Traxxon Type F. So you know, probably didn't sell as many of them, and there you go. So nowadays there's just not a lot of survivors out there. Rescued this one about an hour from me. It has not run in we don't even know. It was purchased by another fella in the 70s, non-running, and he had good intentions and brought it home, put it out behind his shed, and never touched it again. So it's been all of that time and more. When I found it down there, it was sunk, you know, jeepers, probably a good 8 to 10 inches into the ground. You can see the one area of the track that's rusted heavily. It was completely under the ground. So the crazy thing is that I found another one, and I was so excited about it. Purchased it basically sight unseen from like I said, a place about 13 hours from here, and it's getting shipped here. It should be here any minute, and I am really eager to see what kind of condition this thing is in. You know, it was restored at some point, but has been sitting outside a large number of years, is my understanding. So we're gonna see what we got. So a little bit more on this Bell City. This one is from around 1926. I don't have the serial pin pointed on it. The exhaust manifold gasket is actually covering it up. But due to characteristics of the castings, I would put this somewhere around 1926. It has a later Model N Zenith gasoline manifold and carburetor on it, which is nice. Of course, everything is set right up solid, but it's still a nice manifold and carb. Hopefully we can bring that back to life. The story goes with this one is that it was privately owned, and the individual that owned it used it to skid logs out of his back 40. And at one point, he was pulling a log across a creek bed, and climbing up the other side of the creek bed, he flipped it over. And I don't know, nor did the previous owner know, whether he survived or not. You can see how high he was hooking, so it's not a huge surprise that that would have happened climbing out of a creek bed, but it does make sense because the tank is earlier and the radiator is earlier than the rest of the unit. So if he were to have flipped this over, the tank and the radiator likely were broken or smashed, otherwise destroyed. and they swapped them out for, you know, whatever they could find for Fordson parts at that time. I did get as much of the history on this as I possibly could. Interviewed the previous owner. I'll put together a few video clips of rescuing this. I don't have a ton of good footage, but I'll let you see what I do have when we went down to bring this thing home. So another interesting snippet about these Bell Cities is this is a later Bell City, which again makes sense because looking at these castings, this says is around 1926. The other thing that indicates that this is later is that it does not have any leaf spring across the front. This apparatus, I'm assuming the previous owner was using to hang weight off the front for when he was skidding logs, but otherwise it's just kind of there. The early ones had a big leaf spring that went across the front and was used in conjunction with the ability for the wheels to articulate a little bit. Pretty clever, neat setup. And another cool thing is that the one that's coming is early. So we'll have an example of an early track pull and an example of a later track pull, which is just super, super cool. Well, here it is, home in the flesh. Got it unloaded and pushed into the shop. That was quite the ordeal. This thing is pretty much everything I was hoping it to be. I'm pretty excited. Very good condition. Has what I believe to be a reproduction manifold from Rose Machine. Only damage to it I can see is crank handle here is quite waffled underneath it. I don't really understand what happened. I don't know whether someone backed into it or whether they tried to pull it onto a trailer and hooked it on the trailer. It did break the casting a little bit under there, but it's not terrible. So we'll deal with that. Has a side drive magneto conversion on it, so that'll be nice. Make for easier starting. Lots of moss or mold or whatever you want to, green stuff. Good pressure washing, probably clean this thing up quite a bit. Definitely in need of a steering wheel. So interestingly, this machine is substantially different from my other track pull. And my original assumption is that this is an earlier model. And, I expected some differences with this model versus a later model, as one thing was the leaf spring that I talked about before. But the chassis are different. The side frames are different. The castings for the drives are different. The steering linkage setup is different. Notice on this one too, the extra legroom that they've created with the links. And you look at the other one, there's almost no place to put your feet. All of it is pretty substantially different. It's very, very intriguing. So, I don't have a lot to go on with these things. I'd like to try to get some original literature. So I don't know if there was just design improvements along the way as these were manufactured, or whether they actually had two different models. I'm not certain. Need to do some homework on that. Originally, I had just thought that the biggest fundamental difference was the spring across the front versus the stiffer frame underneath the later models, which eliminated the spring. But it appears that there's quite a lot more than just that. So, in the interim, we need to find out if this engine is stuck or not. There's no way to tell. This has been sitting outside for a long time. I don't know if you can see in there. There's a ton of rust, and the spark plugs are pretty substantially rotted. Need to get in there with a light to show you. There you go. Now you can see. Yeah, so this thing has been sitting outside for a very long time, which is very interesting because this doesn't look like a terribly old restoration. There's some new hardware in it here and there. You can tell that the engine's been out of it. There's some differences in the paint on the front bolster and the engine. I can see some indications of some silicone here and there. But for that amount of corrosion to happen around the spark plugs, it's been sitting in the weather quite a long time. So, step one, if I get my cord out of here, we need to get this crank handle out of here. I had originally thought maybe I'd get the hot wrench out and see if I can bend it straight, but I've decided that's, you know, it's probably going to be quicker and easier to just cannibalize some parts that I've got and pull a crank handle out, and we'll swap it out with another one. So let's get after it. Well, I've got a crank handle pulled out of this spare front end and bolster that I had. Man, that was quite the ordeal. As you can see, the hot wrench was again involved. But it's out, it's cleaned up. I think we should be able to make it work. So some of these become kind of a pain to get out because, you know, over close to or over 100 years of cranking an engine over, it puts a little kink in the pin, and boy, do they ever get wedged in there. So it took quite a bit of persuasion to get that out, and not to mention the cotter pin through the center of it. Fun times. Hopefully the one that's in the crawler comes out a little bit easier, because we know that that engine was apart just by the indications that I talked about before. So we'll get after that, see how that goes. So the disadvantage of this one, though I suspect it's going to come out, need baby hands to get down in there. It is buried right down in the bottom there, and there's not a lot of room to work. But I wiggled the crank around and the pin does wiggle, so I think as long as we can get in there and get the cotter pin out, it's probably going to drop right out. So with any luck, here we go. You know, sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. Like the time that you just need an Extendo Punch 5000. Yeah, that ought to do it. Worked like a charm. Well, there it is. Woof. I'm still astonished at I've never seen one that bad. That's pretty aggressive. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to use, obviously, this crank handle. And I think I'll probably use the pin and the spacer out of this one. This pin is a little bit less waffled. So we'll make a good one out of the two, and then verify that the engine is in fact stuck, which I'm sure we can expect it to be. But then we'll know, and we can move on to phase 2, which is trying to break it free. Here we go, let's get her put together. Well, we have a crank handle, and we have determined that the engine is in fact stuck. Not shocking. So now we get to start the adventure of trying to remove spark plugs that look like they have been sitting on the bottom of the ocean for a long time. And hopefully not break them off in the head, which would really suck. So, here we go.